Hello and welcome. I'm Jeff Richards. I am one of the trustees of the Friends of St Nicholas Churchyard, and it's another wonderful day, but we can't meet in the churchyard to have this ramble. We are still in social isolation. So this is the best we can do. This is a historic time we're living through, so we might as well take some time for history. And in today's session, I'm going to be looking at William Gilpin and the invention of tourism. He's certainly an interesting person. He does have a link to St Nicholas and Sutton, even though he's more correctly identified as being very much to do with Cheam. We'll see that there's a strong link to Sutton as we go through our conversation. I am enormously grateful for the fact that we've got the support of three organisations actually, I should say. We've got Enjoy Sutton. They are the business group representing 500 odd businesses within the central Sutton area. Got all very diverse area, lots of different organisations trying to make Sutton a prosperous and welcoming place in the High Street. Also the Civic Society, Sutton Civic Society, they are the critical friends of the council when it comes to planning, and I would thoroughly recommend you having a check out and conversation with the Sutton Civic Society to see how you can play your role in making the environment of Sutton a better place, certainly being able to see how the Sutton plan is working out. And I'm going to touch on a number of different topics, whether it's educational theory, educational change, historical aspects of tourism and things like that. Well, there are lots of courses that Sutton College run that would be right up your street. So I thoroughly recommend you having a word with Sutton College about how you can take these studies further. Now, I'm going to start my proper ramble now, and I have a grumble, and it's a childhood grumble. And one of the memories that I have as a child is we're at a bank holiday weekend, and just think back to what it was like for me as a 8-year-old, a 9-year-old boy on a bank holiday weekend. I'd be busy playing, making something, model making, reading a book, doing something, minding my own business, and my parents would say something like, "Oh, let's go for a drive in the country, isn't it going to be wonderful?" And we'd all pile into this overly heated car. I'd stick my legs to the vinyl of the seating and experience the nauseating drive out into the countryside, by which my parents would try and distract me from the rising sense of car sickness by telling me to look out of the window, there's something beautiful. Why don't you take the camera and snap something? Usually hedgerows, based on where I was sitting in the car, hedgerows and traffic signals weren't really the most interesting thing in the world. But we do enjoy going out into the countryside. We do go out into the countryside and take our own children as well. We did this with our children, going out and exploring ruins and being able to frame shots, take selfies in fantastic spaces as we hunt the perfect spot. And this building, this building here happens to be a wonderful place that you can go and visit. It's the ruins of Tintern Abbey, and it is a landscape that you just want to take photographs in. You just want to take pictures, and you want to be able to include yourself into that picture and be able to compose what makes an interesting shot. Well, our ability to look at pictures like that, to look at it as a culture and to say, there we are, that's really interesting, that's a desirable place to go, is down really to some of the cultural changes that William Gilpin introduced. William Gilpin in 1770, 250 years ago, he did this tour of the Wye Valley, and he wrote a book. He did the tour in 1770. It was published a couple of years later. And it created a sensation that changed the way in which we, as a culture, look at places to visit. And immediately, really, after he published his book, and then it was followed up with a series of books, he taught the world to look at nature for its picture-worthy structure, to frame a picture in an interesting way and look at landscapes for their structural interest. And so it's quite interesting that he's got combining here an interest in nature and an interest in art, and getting us to look at nature in an artistic way. And William Gilpin himself, he was born in 1724 in Scaleby Castle, which is north of Carlisle. So he was a long way from being a local man, as not to do with, he wasn't a Surrey man, he wasn't a Sutton man by birth. He is very much somebody who came from the north to the south. And he came from a church family, a very artistic family as well. Many of his antecedents were artistic, were talented in their draftsmanship, and had a great, strong interest in the church. William was very devout himself, and he became a talented artist, although he was never as great as his younger brother, Saury Gilpin, who became one of the leading animal artists of the 18th century. William studied in Oxford, graduated in 1744. He then returned to Carlisle, where he was ordained a deacon, but he returned to Oxford then and completed his MA, finishing his MA in 1748. And then he would have been 24 at that point, and then he was ordained priest by the Bishop of Winchester. So he'd come south then, south from Oxford, to look for a curacy in Winchester diocese. He wasn't successful in securing a position. I think he was too much of an outsider there in Winchester. So he went to London, tried to secure some livings in London diocese. He wasn't successful there, and he, through contacts, which I think are family contacts, with the Sanksay family, he came to Cheam. And he came to Cheam around about 1750. Now, this picture is not Cheam Church. I've shown you this before. This is the St Nicholas Church as it was in the 18th century. So this is the church that he would have seen. But the point is that James Sanksay, which was the person who brought William Gilpin to Cheam, actually brought him to Sutton first of all, because William Gilpin, James Sanksay was the rector of Sutton, had become rector of Sutton in 1745. And James Sanksay had inherited Cheam School in 1739, so 6 years before he became the rector of Sutton. So James Sanksay very much having a very busy role. I think I started to indicate in the last conversation that we had about the development of roads and things, that James Sanksay also had responsibilities in the Turnpike Trusts, as well as the distribution of charities. Very, very busy as the rector, holding things together with the vestry committee, the local authority. And William Gilpin came to Sutton and came to Cheam School as something called an usher. He was basically the second master, or the deputy head within the school. The term usher is an archaic term, meaning second schoolmaster or deputy head. And so the Cheam school that you may know that Cheam School used to be based at Whitehall. This is the Whitehall building in Cheam. It actually moved out of Whitehall in 1719. James Sanksay, I'd mentioned that he had inherited Cheam School in 1739, actually inherited it from his father, Daniel Sanksay, and Daniel Sanksay had owned the school since 1708, I think it was, and had rebuilt the school in 1719 and had moved it to a new position. And this is an image of the school actually in the beginning of the 19th century, so a generation or two still further on from William Gilpin, but this is the building that William Gilpin would have known in Cheam, and it's where there's a bit of it that remains, which is the chapel, which is now part of the Roman Catholic Church in Dallas Road, and the new building was part of what is now Table Court in Cheam. So when William Gilpin came to Cheam in round about 1749, 1750, he would have come into a school that was in its new building for 30 years. I don't have a picture of James Sanksay. I only have a picture of his father. I don't know whether all the Sanksay men wore red lipstick, but still we have here. Once you see Daniel Sanksay is wearing lipstick, you'll think that that you can't unsee the fact that he's wearing red lipstick. But here we have a fairly naive type of portrait of Daniel Sanksay. The Sanksay family is a very interesting family, and I really do want to talk about them at some point, because they come from Huguenot stock. They are originally French refugees fleeing religious persecution at the end of the 17th century, but by now they were well into the establishment of this country, training young English boys to be proper English men, and it was aimed at certainly gentlemen, the sons of gentlemen who could afford to go to a school. Now, James Sanksay did not enjoy teaching. I think it's fair to say that he did not enjoy teaching. He was certainly a scholar. He was a Greek scholar, excellent scholar, but actually interacting with snotty schoolboys was not something that he enjoyed. In fact, you could say it positively sucked the fun out of life for James Sanksay. Through local connections, he'd obviously been in Cheam and been around Cheam for a long time, with the building going off then to Daniel being there from 1708. You would have known the Lords of the Manor of Sutton. They were of that. And actually, Henry Cliff, who was the Lord of the Manor of Sutton in 1745, who gave the manor, gave the living of the rectory of Sutton to James Sanksay, would have been essentially the same class. They weren't old style gentry. They were new people in the form of the Sanksay family. They were immigrants. They were originally French. Huguenot family who are immigrants, and in the case of the Cliff family, they were basically merchant seamen who had made it big in shaking the banyan tree in India. So they were East India. Henry Cliff had been an East India captain. So James Sanksay became the rector of Sutton in 1745, but because everyone came from these new routes, they were desperately insecure when it came to their social position. And although James Sanksay married well, he married a lady called Catherine Furman in 1750. Catherine Furman, and they got married in Beddington, so she was a local, from a local family. They were adamant that but she was adamant that he was going to quit the school and have nothing to do with the school, because his position now of rector of Sutton meant that being a schoolmaster was well below his station. So he behind every insecure man, there's probably a woman who's giving him a strong background to drive him on in terms of what he does or doesn't do. So William Gilpin was passed to school by James Sanksay. Now, James Sanksay and his brother, there's a brother Sanksay, Robert Sanksay, who was a druggist, another son of Daniel Sanksay, who had become a druggist, a very successful druggist or chemist in London. And again, the Sanksay family is a good story in here, but Robert Sanksay, druggist to the king, with a successful practice in St Martin's in the Fields, gave a loan to gave us really a secure loan to our friend William Gilpin to make the school a success, return it to the status it had in their father's time. And so it was very keen to say, well, you do the reforms that you want to do. We know that we took the eye off the ball. James must have had a certain amount of guilt in knowing that, frankly, he'd let his father down in allowing a very good school that was Cheam fall into a state of disorder. When I think Gilpin took over the school, there was something like 15 pupils, so it was really quite a low ebb. But eventually they got on so well that James Sanksay gave the school a copy of his Greek book that he wrote. He gave them about 40 copies of that. So James Sanksay and the Sanksay family actually shoveled quite a lot of money into making William Gilpin's school a success. Now, William Gilpin, very good teacher, very enthusiastic, with very modern, and of course all these things are to do with the time that he lives in, but he had a much more practicable use about education. So he wasn't interested in ramming Greek education or Latin education down anybody's throat until they understood why it was useful to them. And he would introduce things in a logical way. So he understood the hierarchy of learning. For example, he would teach and make sure that people knew French before he would start them on Latin. He would start them on the easy before the difficult. He would also not worry about composition in Latin. He wanted the boys to be able to read it and understand it, but not have to force them to write letters, because he knew that business letters and correspondence would be done in English, and he explained that time and time again to the parents to the boys that he was teaching, that he was there to equip them to run their families' estates, to make a success out of it. Now, in this time, in the 1750s, he was developing something of a reputation, not only as a teacher, but also as an art critic. Remember, his brother, Saury, was a very good artist. William was an educated artist. He brought Saury in to run some of the classes in Cheam. So they taught drawing as well, very useful. Again, Cliff family, East India merchantmen, sailors wanted to make sure that they could have good maps, good drawings of anything that they saw. And what we've also got with where we are is that he married in 1753. It was at a turning point in his success, really, because the school had started to become successful. He married his childhood sweetheart, who was called Margaret, and a first cousin, I think, as well. They were to have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Unfortunately, the little girl died early and is commemorated with a plaque in the Lumley Chapel in Cheam. The eldest boy, John, went on to emigrate to America, and the school eventually was going to be passed in 1777 to his youngest son, who also called William, who would take the school over. The school had a very, very good reputation, and here you can see that this is a sketch map of the school drawn by a pupil, and it's come from the collection within the Bodleian Library in Oxford. William Gilpin worked very, very hard to raise the reputation of the school by improving the teaching in the school. When he started, there were maybe 15 boys. So that was in right at the beginning of 1750. By really 1759, his reputation had started to gain. So this is when, it was good enough for Johnny, let's send his younger brother to William Gilpin to look after. Well, in 1759, there were 20 boys. In 1762, that was starting to be the leap. It leapt in 1762 to 31 boys, in 1766 to over 60, and eventually, by the time he retired in 1777, there were over 80 boys at Cheam School. And it was largely because of the reforms in the curriculum that he did. I outlined some of those ideas, and the way he changed the pastoral matters within the school. He took pledges from the boys. He was educating them to keep their word, and so they made promises that they would have to keep, and they wrote and signed the pledges that they were taking, that they would take responsibility for their actions. And his reputation grew as a teacher so much that eventually, after he had retired, one bishop of Salisbury was so pleased with what William Gilpin had managed to draw out of his son in the way of education. Educare is the drawing out of the character of the person. It's not something that you're pushing in, you're drawing out a character when you're educating somebody. He made William Gilpin a prebend of his cathedral. So he gave him basically an honorary position within, made one of the canons of the cathedral, and gave him an allocation of revenue from the cathedral. Now, William Gilpin had a fantastic amount of success as a teacher, but, excuse me, anyone who's a teacher will probably understand that he's unlikely to have been recorded in history as a fantastic teacher. Teachers don't, in our culture, they don't always have the best chance of posterity. We don't remember the great teachers of the past. Individually we do, but as a culture we don't. But it's actually his other activities, it's particularly his activities on popularizing the concept of the picturesque and his theory of the picturesque that captured the popular imagination at the time and actually has fundamentally shifted British culture, and I'd argue as well world culture as well. So he painted and he sketched. He wasn't as talented as his brother Saury, but he understood art, and as an art critic, he developed this theory that landscape painting should illustrate nature at its wildest and most dramatic. And in the essay that he wrote in 1753, he defines pictures, the picturesque actually, as that kind of beauty which is agreeable in a picture. So you have there a starting definition. And it's useful to say it's as pretty as a picture, or it's as beautiful as a picture. And William, used the school holidays, the summer school holidays, to travel, and he started near Cheam, and travelled further afield over the years. So he took a tour through Surrey in 1768, for example, and in 1770 he took a tour which was to become the most important tour, and that was the tour along the River Wye. When he travelled, he made lots and lots of notes. He filled his notebooks with sketches, he filled his notebooks with descriptions of the landscape and his idea of what made a good picture. And so he eventually he retired in 1777. He became vicar of Bouldra in Hampshire. He actually went on to create a village school there as well. But eventually after his retirement, his notes were published as books, and they were an immediate sensation. He had, I think, 6 tours, and 6 books came out describing different tours, each promoting his theory of the picturesque. To William, the rough and rugged scene was always preferable to the smooth and ordered picture. Ruins were better than complete buildings, and brooding clouds superior to a clear sky. And his books ran through edition after edition after edition, and his dedication to seeking out landscapes that would make a good picture, that's the heart of the picturesque, actually, you can probably guess, attracted a fair amount of mockery and derision. And he became parodied in a book by William Gilpin called the Dr. Syntax books. And the Dr. Syntax books appeared after William Gilpin's death in 1806, and they were illustrated by William Rowlandson. Now, sorry, not William Rowlandson, Thomas Rowlandson. Now, Thomas Rowlandson, we know before. Thomas Rowlandson is this famous artist who drew lots of the cartoons of the 18th century. Very, very scurrilous stuff. So if we're going to look at some histories, if I was to illustrate it through Thomas Rowlandson art, I probably couldn't include some of the pictures in my rambles. But Thomas Rowlandson himself, this is a picture of the cock in Sutton. I included this in the conversation about how did we get here, my ramble there, a couple of sessions ago. Thomas Rowlandson was not a stranger to Sutton. He knew the road down to Brighton very well and down to Reigate very well. And I've discussed in a previous ramble how people during the 18th century were travelling more and more. The commercial needs of business and trade had created the need for the turnpike trusts that they in turn led to the improvement of the roads. And I've mentioned that James Sanksay, and James Sanksay you can think of as very much, the rector of Sutton was very much William Gilpin's patron in the local context, certainly in the early years, but there would have been a certain amount of moral obligation to the Sanksay family. That the man who had brought William to Cheam School, the rector of Sutton, had, along with the local vestry, the local committee responsible for the area of Sutton, had been given the responsibility of organising the improvements of the road from Sutton west through Cheam onwards to Ewell, and then southwards and what was called Sutton Lane, which we call the Brighton Road now, on the way over Banstead Downs towards Banstead. Now, the Banstead Road was experiencing heavy traffic from the 1750s onwards, so tourism, travel for leisure, was not new. Travel for sightseeing is a new concept. Travelling to go to Brighton to have fun in 1750, or to go for health reasons, was reasons to travel. And just look at this map again. This is Rock's map from Rocqueus, Rock's map from the 18th century. Look there, and you see the little inn or beer house called Little Hell on what was the Brighton Road, and you'll see that people were travelling in the 18th century and going on holiday for other reasons, for business. There was, and really, there's more reasons for going to a place called Little Hell than simply wanting to trade. Anyway, William Gilpin, our teacher, would have been well known in terms of people getting what the mockery was about. This is now a few years after William's death. Jane Austen, in the person who wrote Pride and Prejudice, and I'll mention a little bit more about Pride and Prejudice in a moment, but Jane Austen herself, we know, owned a copy of the mockery of William Gilpin in Coombe's poem. So she knew all about the picturesque and the mockery of Dr. Syntax. In Pride and Prejudice, there's a scene, I think this is in chapter 10, when Caroline Bingley and Louisa Hurst basically displace Elizabeth Bennet from walking with Mr. Darcy. So they place themselves in such a way as to monopolize a garden path. They can't go down there together. Mr. Darcy does attempt to offset their rudeness by inviting Elizabeth to join them once again. Only, and this is the wit of Jane Austen put into the words of Elizabeth Bennet, excuse me, only to receive the reply. You are charmingly grouped and appear to uncommon advantage. The picaresque would be spoiled by admitting a fourth. Now, here you can see on the picture, I've got an engraving, which is a picturesque engraving. You'll notice that there are 3 cattle in this picture. The picturesque the words from Jane Austen plays upon a comment of Gilpin's relating to the grouping of cattle, in which he considers 3 to be the optimum number for a picturesque composition. Elizabeth Bennet here is mocking the picturesque and simultaneously managing to say that Caroline and Louisa are cows. So William Gilpin, well known in the neighborhood, riding around, looking at things that have the possibility of being considered to be picture-worthy. So he was a well-known figure around Sutton and Cheam. James Sanksay, by the way, doesn't appear to have had a curate, and he remember he was being made rector of Sutton in 1745. He doesn't get a curate until 1765, 2 years before his death. But I do remember seeing Gilpin's name in the registers, and I believe that William Gilpin would have taken more than a few services occasionally, over the years at St Nicholas in Sutton. There is something else which has driven me something of distraction, and this is where, if you see something and you think it's noteworthy, you should actually take a note. This is a lesson to myself. I've been tearing my hair out because I remember reading a description of the Tower of St Nicholas, as shown here, as being constructed of chestnut. and an opinion about the structure and comparing it to St Stephen's Hall in Westminster. So part of the Houses of Parliament. And the description was supposedly by William Gilpin. And I can't find it. So I don't have that. Now, I said that William Gilpin retired from Cheam School. He retired from Cheam School in 1777. He went off to be vicar of Boulder in Hampshire. Here you can see this is the cartoon of Dr. Syntax taking possession of his living. So this is where he retires and goes off to work in the country parish. William Gilpin died in 1804, a few years before the mockery of his opinions started to really hit the popular pop culture as well. But that tour that William Gilpin took in 1770, that tour 250 years ago along the River Wye, meant that he wrote a book that changed the way in which everyone looks at the countryside. You can think that William Gilpin heralded the birth of British sightseeing tourism. And the schoolmaster from Cheam was a pioneer in the appreciation of landscape in Britain. And his ideas, you can see that there is a joined up connection here to the idea of protecting the countryside for its aesthetic sense, including the areas of outstanding natural beauty. The concept of natural beauty is very much something that sits in with William Gilpin, and eventually even our national parks, you could probably say, come from that route in. So next time you take a selfie next to a really cool place or building, just think the reason that you think that this is a picture-worthy place has largely been because William Gilpin changed the way everyone sees the world. Now, I've come to the end of what I wanted to talk about today. But I'm going to warn you now that I'm going to take a break next week. I'm not going to be, I'm going to take a half term, if you like, next Sunday. I've fallen behind in the editing of these videos. So next Sunday, there's not going to be a ramble, but we'll start up again on the 7th of June. Now, I'm going to use my day off to make sure that the YouTube channel that we've got here is updated, and I'll also be trying to produce in a much more readable form, an edited form, the text of the rambles as well, so people may want to have something to read as well. Now, in these sessions, I have very much intended to educate, to inform, and hopefully I've entertained you as well as we've rambled around. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my stories, and if you want to know more about local history or local culture, then please do check out our friends at Sutton College. They've got lots of different things to develop the themes that I've talked about in today's ramble. Please do let me know if you want anything covered in these rambles. I can always put those onto the waiting list. I think one of the ones I need to talk about is Henry Witch. So I will see if I can cover him and the Civil War rector of Sutton at that time. For now, I'm going to say thank you very much for listening. Goodbye. Your history, Sutton.